I'll begin my story. I was raised by a single mother from Mexico. She had a third grade education, two kids, my sister, much older sister than I, and she brought us up from Mexico when I was about 8 or 9 years old up to San Jose, California, of course, seeking a better life for her kids in particular. Things did not go well in the United States. My sister ended up in an abusive relationship. My mother's life was very difficult, and everything was concentrated on me going to college and being the first one to go to college. I ended up at UC Berkeley and entered a very different world in the world that we had lived in when we were facing poverty all the time. Out of that, then I was I was told by my mother that I had to become an engineer to make money and support the family. And so I did come out as an engineer. At that point in time, then my mother's health had really deteriorated, and I wanted to spend my money in order that I was making as an engineer in order to take care of her health and the operations she needed, and she refused. And so the difficult part was that in order to stop me from helping her, she basically took her own life, and left me with this with a promise that I had to then not let what happened to our family happen to other families. So in about 1978, I joined the nonprofit sector, the war on poverty in the United States, hoping that we could find some solution so families wouldn't suffer through what my family had suffered through. I had been running programs for about 20 years. We were considered in the Bay Area to have some of the best programs in the country. I was honored by President Clinton with an invitation to the 1999 State of the Union address to honor my work. At the same time, however, I knew that the work I was doing was really flawed. I knew that I wouldn't bring my own family through my own services, and that if we were considered to have some of the best services in the country, then our standards were way too low. I knew that the system itself looked for people's needs and treated people more as charity cases, which is something my mother would never accept. She would always say that those things take her pride away, and pride in being respected was really huge for her. So I faced a dilemma in 2000, the year 2000, because I didn't believe in my own work and therefore had to start a new journey. The new journey started with a phone call from who was then mayor of Oakland, who later became the governor of California, Mayor Jerry Brown. And basically, he challenged me that all of us in the nonprofit sector running services were poverty pimps, and that we were making a living and could make a living because people were poor and stayed poor. At that point, because I didn't believe in my services, then I had to agree with him. And so his next words are really what challenged the change for me. He basically said, look, if you could do anything you wanted to do, and regulations and money were not a problem, but you really wanted to bring about some fundamental change where there was a change, a social change that really made a difference in the long term, what would you do? And you come to my office and you tell me next month. So for 3 weeks, I thought about everything I could in terms of all of a sudden, I'm free. I could do anything I want to do, and I want to change the system. And finally, after 3 weeks of looking at my background, all the social service programs I ran and knew all the people in the other programs, I came to the conclusion that I didn't know, but I had to go talk to the mayor. And so he asked me, so what would you do to actually bring about some change? And I basically had to tell him, I don't know. But for that fact, my mother knew what she wanted to do to get us out of poverty. And I know that our friends were the same way. They had their own direction of what they wanted to do. And so I told the mayor that what I would do is that I would then find out from all these different friends and peoples in these communities that we cared about what they would do to get their own lives together and improve their community. That we would provide no services. We would do it basically as a research project to try to understand what the capacity was of families to help themselves and to help each other. He thought it was interesting. He threw his backing, and we started what was then called the Family Independence Initiative to learn what the capacity was of families to lead their own change. Very quickly, I started learning that actually the capacity was bigger than I ever imagined. The lesson, and probably what I want to share the most, is that I came to learn that there is a very underutilized force for social change that is existing everywhere, and that is hidden in plain sight. These were revelations for me that I knew from my neighborhood how things were, but that actually it was global in terms of humans actually and the residents themselves knowing what to do. And so what I came to realize and later found studies is that we have really underestimated the ability of the ordinary residents, everyday people, people like my mother and our friends, to lead their own change, that we've relied very heavily on the programs in the war on poverty and other NGOs, that we relied heavily on government, and that we've relied really on institutions much more than we should have, and that there is actually a power of people finding ways around the barriers that they confront. And one of the barriers is really the glass ceilings that people face as they try to get their selves together. But that within, and this is what most studies indicate, that within almost any group of people, there are what are called positive deviants. These are people that even in the similar circumstances as everybody else, that they find a way around them. They take positive steps forward. They're the ones that can have the little grocery store at the corner, and or a vegetable stand on the street that they sell, or have gotten a kid into college, or any of these little variations. And they have succeeded as either individuals or small groups of people doing that. In the social sector, we tend to ignore them. We think of them as exceptions, and then we go and try to find out what all things are that are wrong in the community. And we forget the exceptions or the positive deviants. So what has emerged for me is that actually what we need to do is focus on the positive deviants. And I've learned that if you actually amplify those ideas, because they've already worked for the ordinary folks, if you amplify those and you share those, and that if they then start becoming the residents themselves become the leaders of the change, that actually you can get change that scales very, very quickly. And let me give you 3 examples. One is historic in the all Black townships, similar to the Chinatowns, that after the slaves were released through the Emancipation Act in the United States, they were actually almost excluded from the white economy. And what they did is they formed their own little townships. And within a very short period of time, they were able to establish hair salons, grocery stores, libraries. They became teachers. They started having bankers. This is a population that had been totally ignored and uneducated, and yet they built entire microeconomies. And the scaling piece was fascinating because within 10-year period, just in one state, the state of Oklahoma, over 50 Black townships with microeconomies were fully developed, the biggest one being in Tulsa, the Black Wall Street, that was burned down by white mobs. So they were attacked. And we also see this in terms of affinity communities, whether it's the Amish or the Jewish running the fabric business in New York or whatever, that when people come together and they share, that actually change can happen very, very quickly. And give you another example is really my family, that when my mother would come into a neighborhood, she knew that if I was influenced by the wrong people, which happened with my sister, that things could go wrong. And so what she would do is try to find out who were the best role models. This wasn't something that she would learn in a university or from a teacher or some program, that automatically she would look at, well, who is doing a business similar to what I want to do? Because my mother would make dresses for quinceañeras. She was a great seamstress. And so she would learn, well, how I could do business in San Jose. And she'd learn that from others that would help her in the community. And then she knew that there were a couple families that had gotten kids into college. And so it turned out that one of the families was an Asian family, and then the other family was a Black family in our neighborhood. And what was interesting to me is that even though we had come from a Mexican town, everybody was Mexican, that here in the United States, now she started making friends with the Asian family and the Black family because those were the role models she wanted me to follow, and that those were the people that were helping her. And I saw these divides, these racial divides and differences kind of start to disappear because, again, we had similar role. I want to get my kid to college. And the third example is actually very, very recent, and it is actually in the country of Liberia. It was about, I think, the second poorest country in the world in 2019 when I went there and asked those families to show me what they would do. Again, the learning the capacity of families to help themselves and help each other was what I wanted to learn. And was that a global thing that happened with humanity? And so I challenged the families in Liberia, okay, do what Jerry Brown told me to do. Do whatever you think is the most important thing to do. And that if you come up with things that seem to work and you're dedicated to, I'll try to back you. And sure enough, within a year, the incomes of those families that they start pooling their initiative together, they start pulling ideas together, they pool their money together, it grew 150%. And within 3 years, it's grown over 400% in terms of earnings. And what they've also done is they start taking care of the fees so that they could get more children to school. They expanded a clinic. They cleaned up a water well for a whole village of 200. And these were voluntarily done because as they were making progress, they start seeing, and one of the things that, again, my mother had asked is, and Jerry Brown had asked is like, well, will people actually start taking care of their own community? And sure enough, in an environment where you are supposed to, and there's an expectation that you help yourself and you help others, that you pay it forward, that in that type of environment, which you see in these tight communities, that in that environment, then the issue of trying to clean up the community and put in latrines and whatever start growing. And so now in Liberia, not only are the families we started with helping themselves and helping their immediate, they are now helping other villages, and they become the role models for villages outside of the areas that we're working in. And they are now actually the role models for people that are refugees in Uganda. So we're connecting those. Our role will be to connect and facilitate the sharing of ideas. And then we then look for investors that will come in after the families are leading a project so that they can finish their project. So again, it scales really, really fast. The issue for us has been that the sector itself and trying to bring change, social change, has become very reliant on institutions. It has actually ignored, and that's why the force for social change is hidden in plain sight. We tend to ignore the exceptional, the families, the positive deviants that could be an ordinary family, and we focus on growing the institution. And what we've learned is that actually, if you focus on growing the relationships of people, how they come together informally to clean up the water wells and clean up their neighborhood, whatever, if you actually reinforce that, then it starts scaling very, very, very quickly from Liberia to Uganda to the Philippines. And that's sort of the experience we're doing. And that experience is now becoming a movement, and it is now being referred to as peer-driven change, which is peers to peers helping each other. And it is actually the thing that can bring this whole concept of change and social change to the world of billions, because the people, the residents themselves, can actually do it themselves. Thank you.